This conference will now be recorded.
All right, everybody. For the purpose of this recording, my name is Rod Soto, and I am one of the co-founders and organizers of HackMiami and Pacific Hackers. Today, we have Michael Brown, who is our absolute policy expert. This gentleman has an incredible amount of experience. This is our go-to guy for policy. He's always on top of it. Anything that is up and coming, and I would say to a certain degree, difficult to understand at times, he makes it easy for us to understand it. He makes it easy for us to approach it. And I think there's a lot of value in what he says, because most of us, in our job at least, we had to deal with some of these policies at times when we're talking with other departments, or we have a specific incident, and it's hard to just start from the beginning without having any directions. And that's where the value of the talks that Michael puts together comes. He does an incredible job making it straightforward and telling you this is what you need to pay attention, this is what you need to look for. And for that, I'm very grateful, Michael. So I'm gonna let you take the floor, and thanks again. And we'll leave the questions for the end, and take it away.
Okay, let's see. Okay. Okay, so hopefully you guys can see my screen okay?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, so let me move some of these things because I can't drive. Okay, that's better. So today I'm talking about what's called the DoD, Department of Defense CMMC, Capability Maturity Model Certification, which has been worked on at this point. We're almost, probably about 2 years. And this was something that I was actually fairly heavily involved in last year. Since a change in my job, it's been less so. So, come on, say a little background on myself. I've been involved in the field for quite a while. I was actually kind of surprised when I was like, oh, this, how long I've been involved in IT and so forth. So I actually started up as a system administrator. I actually was involved with an IT organization at Motorola that was dealt with the capability maturity model. And we were actually, I assessed as an IT organization. That was one of my first introduction to these sort of systems and so forth. Worked my way up the ladder to being a global security architect. Left, I spent about 7 years as a security consultant in the area of governance, risks, and compliance, basically going and working with various companies. And I'm always going to shocked that the variety of companies and what I was doing with them in terms of looking at their security programs and how to improve them and so forth. I left that last December. I'm now at a new job where I'm a security compliance director for a company in the healthcare space. But for us, we have to be high trust certified, SOC 1 and 2, and that's my responsibility to make sure that we maintain that. When it comes to CMC, I'm actually what's called a certified professional. Of course, that's going to expire soon. I never got to use it. And if you don't know what that is, don't worry, I will explain it. I'm involved with various groups here. ISSA, I'm one of the chapter officers, been involved with also the InfraGard, ISACA, ISC squared, IAPP, which is privacy, that I got into last year. Help out with HackMiami. So a little bit back about myself, for those who are not aware of me. So, come on. Okay, so outline, give kind of a background of what this all is. I'm going to cover into third-party or vendor management because that's kind of the driver for this, and then going into some of these, I would call certifications for companies, which again is a big part of it. How they kind of came up with the CMMC, and then of course what's referred to as the ecology for the CMC. That's actually the term they use. And then we'll get into the details of the CMMC. I've actually have the PDFs of it. I actually brought with me. I'm at my dad's apartment. This is my hard copy of the CMMC that I printed out for myself. It is over an inch thick of it that I put together for myself to figure, okay, I got to be doing this. So, and of course, you can get this as a PDF online. It's a bit dry, but that's true of a lot of these sort of programs. So let me go over the basics. Again, as I said, the CMC is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. It is basically a third-party assessment program, but it also includes training and certification, which makes it much more complex within what's referred to as the U.S. Defense Industrial Base, the DIB. So fair warning, there are a lot of acronyms because we're dealing with the DoD. So that's one thing you need to realize. It aims to protect what's called Federal Contract Information, FCI, and Controlled Unclassified Information, CUI, which is pronounced CUI. And I learned that, when I got into this, is that they will say CUI lot. So you hear that and you're like, what the heck is that? That's what that is. It replaces a self-assessment that was brought up. Sorry about this. I'm not sure why. They replace a self-assessment that defense contractors had to go through using NIST SP 800-171. Because of course we know that asking people to do a self-assessment rarely works. What they're doing is that it will be a requirement for contractors to meet certain CMMC levels, for the contracts they're going out after. There's 5 levels. I'll go into this, and it's being rolled out over the next few years. Now, what's kind of interesting is that the General Services Administration, that's GSA, has stated that at this point, it is only needed for DoD contracts, but it will be required for all federal government contractors at some point. So while the focus now is, DoD and DoD contractors, it's probably going to be all federal contractors down the road. And please understand, when I say contractors, these are companies doing contracts for, at this point, the DoD, and that could be anything from, okay, we need someone to make the boots for our soldiers. They're not just going to go to Kmart and Walmart and buy boots. They're going to go to a defense contractor who will make the boots for them based on certain specifications. That's a defense contractor, okay? But there's also be like, okay, we're going to make an airplane that's again being made by a defense contractor, and that airplane is going to have all these other subcomponents, whatnot, made by other companies who are also defense contractors. So that's what we're talking about with these defense contractors, and and they're going to have to make sure that their systems meet the security specifications to protect this data. So again, some definitions. I said, the federal contract information, basically it's what it is. It's information in the federal contracts that need to be safeguarded. I think a lot of us, when we think about this, we talk about, there's, classified data, secret data and whatever, but we sometimes forget that, even if data isn't classified, as secret, the data still has to be protected. Most companies, will have like different levels of data that they will classify. They'll say, okay, this is, internal use only, there might be general business use only, there might be less secure, an internal use only might be secure, but it's less secure than, say, confidential or proprietary data or so forth. CUI, as I said, is unclassified, but it still has to be safeguarded because there's information in these contracts that, we don't really want, outside people, other countries know about. I mean, if I go and say to a company, say, okay, I want you to make boots, it's going to be like, okay, I want you to make X number of boots and this sort of stuff. The view is that level of data, that level of information is something that we probably don't want a foreign government to know, like, so they need so much boots. That tells us something about, the size of their forces. And, oh, look, they're changing, the kind of boots they want. That might tell us something. So that's why this stuff has to be classified. Sorry, not classified, but it has to be protected. Maturity is another term that I think we may not, not everyone has been exposed to. We think about maturity in terms of like, kids being more mature or whatnot like that. But when we talk about an organization, oftentimes people aren't quite sure what's meant by that. But maturity is basically a measurement of the ability of an organization for continuous improvement in a particular discipline. I was exposed to the capability maturity model, which is meant for software, but it was also used for IT, and there's also a maturity model for security. So the idea is that there's this concept, in IT, now there's a continuous improvement. How you do your job, how that's great. Can you continue to improve how you do your job and do it better? So the idea is that the higher the maturity, the higher will be the chances that incidences or errors, so just like, oh, we messed up, is that it will lead to improvements. As in, okay, we messed up. How can we learn from this? But you need to have processes in place to make that happen, that you can learn from your mistakes, improve it, so that next time they're less likely or they less have an impact on your organization. So that's why you want to have a more mature organization, such that, oh, you get hit by ransomware, you get hit by malware or something like that, that you're able to handle that, get over it and move forward. So I kind of touched on this, a little bit in my last presentation on the SOC 2 reports and so forth. But third party, or what's called third party or vendor management, and it's this concept that's what's driving the reason for the CMMC. And this has become very, very important, across the board for a lot of companies. And if you're not really looking at how businesses are now operating, you may be kind of oblivious to this a little bit. But what has happened is that many, many times companies are relying upon a variety of third parties, i.e. other companies, to do services for them, as opposed to doing everything in-house. In the old, in the old days, you'd be part of a big corporation, and they'd have, IT was all done in-house, and the data center were owned by the company, and if everything was their own employees. Oh, you had, HR people. Oh, those worked for the company. Oh, you had, custodial people, janitors. They were employees of companies and so forth. But what has happened is, in many cases, they've kind of pushed that off, and now you have, HR services being delivered by outside companies. So, I see this a lot even with big companies. They don't necessarily have an HR department. They go to something like an ADP, and they do all their HR through that means. They don't own their own data centers. They don't have them at their own center. So they then go to a third party, Terramark, Rackspace, and all the others, and say, okay, we're going to host our servers in these third party companies. Or even taking it further, we're not even going to have servers. We're going to go and virtualize them and put them in a cloud vendor like Azure or AWS and so forth. And as you start doing this, as you start relying upon these third parties and, giving them, your sensitive data, maybe they're just housing it, but still it gives them access to it. This becomes a great deal of concern. What happens to your company that, you're built entirely on AWS, and, AWS goes down, you're not able to deliver your services. That's not good. If this data is being housed by a third party and they lose it or it's stolen, that's going to have an impact on you, and it's all going to be on your head because you went to a third party service. So because of these concerns about how good is the service they're providing, especially when they have access to it, you need to understand how they're doing it. Are they secure? That data center that you're going and relying upon, do they have backup generators and all the other services to ensure that their services are always being delivered to you? They may or they may not do that, but then how do you find that out? And that becomes very, very difficult. So how you have to do it is can be difficult for some. companies will do like various questionnaires and so forth. I've had to deal with this, in recent jobs where, I work for a company, we're providing services to other clients, and the clients come to us and say like, okay, before we work with you, here's this long, questionnaire, and I want you to answer all these questions and so forth before we decide to work with you. Do you have antivirus? Do you do backups? How often? Blah, 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 blah. And it becomes a real lot of work, not just for the companies providing the service, but also for the companies looking to buy those services. It becomes difficult and expensive and time consuming. So what's happened is that we now are you're relying more and more on these validated or verified third-party assessments. So company comes to us and say like, hey, we want to use your services. We say like, yeah, no problem. We have SOC 2, we have ISO 27001, we have this, that, and the other, and we can then provide them evidence of that report, and then they can say, oh yeah, you have all these things, we're good, let's move forward. Though again, it's a lot of work, but that way you do one of these reports in a year, and then you can do that to all your clients, and it makes it easier. And so I kind of threw together this like little list of some of the ones that are out there that people probably have heard about. There's PCI DSS. If you're doing credit cards, you got to have some kind of a PCI assessment. There's the SOC reports, which I mentioned in a presentation earlier this year, though the SOC 1, 2, and 3, and the cybersecurity and the supply chain. There's the ISO 27001 certification, which is an international one for IT controls. There's high trust, which is high healthcare. There's FedRAMP. If you're a cloud company wanting to sell in the federal space, you got to be FedRAMP. And to kind of give you an illustration of that this is AWS's page of all of the things that they have compliance reports for. You see cloud service, you see ISO 27001 and 27017, which is cloud specific, and one for privacy, and they got PCI, and they got SOC 1, 2, and 3, and now we have coming to the US, we got FedRAMP and FERPA and FIPS and High Trust and ITAR and so on and so forth. This is just all the Americas, and then Japan and everyone else, all the other countries around the world. So AWS, if they want to do business, they've got to have all these reports. And so I'm sure they literally have a department of people that's all they do all year round is doing these reports. It's a pain. And there are some general characteristics. I looked at these, is that in many cases these various assessments are done by separate companies who then must be approved by some certifying body. So like SOC 2, the SOC reports, that's from AICPA, but AICPA isn't doing this. They approve various accounting firms to go and do this. ISO doesn't go around and certify companies for their various ISO things. There are various other companies who've been approved to go and certify. High Trust, the High Trust organization, they don't run around again and do high trust certifications. They have authorized organizations. And in many cases, these certifying companies that are doing these actual certifications, they must go through some rigorous things. They may be certified themselves. They had to maybe meet other certain criteria. And if they fail to do so, they'll lose their accreditation, which means that they lose out on any money that they could get from going and doing these certifications, because these certifications are not cheap. The companies that are doing these will oftentimes have to have qualified people to do the assessors. Again, not just, oh yeah, I'm a assessor, I can do these assessments. In many cases, the assessor had to go through training and certification themselves. And what's also kind of strange is the certifications, some of them expire every year. So it's every year you got to be recertified. But some are, either they last for 2 years or 3 years, but that doesn't mean that, oh, you do it and then like, oh, we'll see you in 2 years. They will come in at, the midpoint and do kind of a, an audit or whatever it's like to make sure everything is still running. So these things become like that, very, very complex. I wanted to mention FedRAMP because what I see with FedRAMP is some of the things that I see with the CMMC. So FedRAMP is actually, it's an acronym, Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program. As I said, if you're a cloud service provider and you want to sell into the federal space, you must be FedRAMP approved. If you're not, then too bad, so sad. I mean, that's the way it works. So what they did was they put together what was called the Joint Authorization Board, JAB, which sits under the General Services Administration. So this is, the GSA is a federal agency. So the JAB is kind of a federal agency. But kind of again what I mentioned, the JAB doesn't go around and certify anyone. What they do is they certify separate companies, which are called 3 PAOs, third-party assessment organizations, which they review and they approve, and these are the ones that go out and do the approval. Now, to be a 3 PAO, and the company I used to work for, we looked at this, so I actually spent some time looking at what was required to do this. They need to meet certain criteria as set down by what's called a group called A2LA. They're based in an accreditation laboratory. They must have what's called a QMS, a quality management system. They actually must meet an ISO certification called 17020, which has FedRAMP specific requirements. And to get this is not a trivial thing. It's like a 1 or 2 year process just to get that. And then the FedRAMP requirements themselves are based on the NIST SP 853 control set that you may have heard about. So I guess I would just a little touching on this because again, this kind of ties into what we're talking about. You guys may have heard about these different things, and people use different terms for what's kind of the same thing. So you might have heard of FISMA, you might have heard of RMF, or the Risk Management Framework. You might have heard of the SB 853. What this is really is that FISMA is a federal regulation that basically requires that federal agencies must develop, document, and implement a information security program on their systems. And even if these systems are being provided or managed by a contractor, it still has to meet these requirements. And if you've ever looked at 853, it's pretty complex. So NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, they develop the standards and guidelines through their 800 series and the FIPS series of publications. So if you look at the SB 800 series, some of those documents that were created there were done to meet FISMA. 853 happens just to be the control set, but it's not the most important. I am not going to list them all. There are a lot of them. An important one is 37, which actually defines the risk management framework. I mentioned 853, which is now come out with a revision 5. That's the control set. And it's pretty complex because depending on what should be the level of security of that system determines how much controls you have. People talk about FISMA, high, medium, and low because of that, and that's why these other two documents, the FIPS documents, set down kind of like how much you need to have. There's actually further ones. There's 53A, B, and C. A is assessing, B is control baselines, and I was pretty sure they had a C, but I couldn't find it. But and these are big documents. I showed here the CMMC here being like super thick. I think the 853 is about as thick as this. So I think there's 17 families of control sets, and that's to them. I'm not going to go into them, but most of these things here look pretty straightforward for those who are involved in IT security. Awareness and training, okay, it means you make sure people go through security awareness training. Pretty straightforward. Contingency planning, that means you have a business continuity plan, you have a disaster recovery plan. Incident response, you have an incident response plan if you get hit by hackers, or you lose data, or you hit by ransomware. Media protection, that means that you have protection in place for backup media and data and so things like that. Physical environmental protection, you have physical security controls, things like that. So I think most of these, I think just for the name, I think if you think about it, oh yeah, you kind of understand what they're about. Now, I had mentioned this one, and I need to touch about it a little bit more. It's another NIST document, SB 800-171, which was, and if you can see the title of it, it's protecting controlled unclassified information in non-federal systems and organizations. So basically, it sets down how CUI is to be protected in non-federal systems and organizations. Basically, your federal contractors having CUI and what they need to do to protect it. And the problem and this was created as a subset of 853. Instead of 17 controls, it's 14 controls. You can see a lot of the same names, very similar. But originally, then the problem with it is that contractors just had to self-assess. Basically it was like, do you meet this? Yes or no? Oh yes, we do. Okay, great. That doesn't. there's no real check on if they really have or not. Like someone can say like, oh yes, we're going to say no and lose out on this government contract. Yeah. There's some further documents just to be aware of. There's 171A, which is for assessing the controls. There's also 172, which is on enhancing it. And I'll mention it because it might be a little confusing, is that originally 172 was to be called 171B when it was in draft form. And what's kind of frustrating is like, even in this one, they didn't update it. So they keep making reference to 171B, which didn't get released under that name, but I'm not sure why they didn't go through and update it. But anyway, so this gives you some of the background of what led to this. So because of the issue of having these federal contractors self-assess against it, the DoD decided to create the CMMC. And what they did, which I was a little bit surprised about, was instead of going to NIST, they instead went to Carnegie Mellon's Software Engineering Institute to develop it. And what they did was because they combined 800-171 with the 5-level CMM that they had created and other standards. And they kind of laid them over 5 levels within the CMC. So they included some of these others here that you may or may not have heard about. They announced it in 2019. Version 1 came out in early 2020. The current version is like 1.02. So that's where that stands. And this was just more of an FYI. If you're not familiar with the CMM, this is the 5 levels that they have in the CMM. And the idea is that initial is where everyone starts, where you like a kind of ad hoc and seat of your pants type thing. Level 2 gets into manage, where you're doing some processes. Defined as more further and so forth. Like I said, I was in an IT organization. We were assessed at level 3. That's probably as good as an IT organization could get. It's really difficult to get to level 5, but there are companies out there that claim they are. So, but anyway, now one thing that was really very different, and this has caused a lot of people getting all, arguing about it, and I'm sure it'll probably never be resolved, is that unlike with FedRAMP, and this is why I brought up FedRAMP, is that what the DoD did was they authorized the creation of the CMMC accreditation body, CMMC AB, as an independent nonprofit organization. So the CMMC AB would be the one managing what they call the CMMC ecosystem, but it's separate from the government. It was not like with FedRAMP, where you had a group that was actually a federal body of federal employees underneath the JSA, that it is separate. And if you're curious, you can go read the articles of people kind of like saying like, this isn't right, and this isn't a good idea, and so forth. But what they've been doing, and it's kind of strange that we're getting closer to being around 2 years now, is that they would then set up and establish this whole system that would include training for individuals. So if you want to be an assessor, there is training to be an assessor. It's a little more complex than that, because they're going to have a criteria to certify assessors and approved practitioners, to establish criteria for what are called C3PAOs and RPOs. Again, I'll get into what all this is. They will manage the marketplace for this ecosystem. So it's like, okay, where do I find a list of these people, these companies, and so forth? They have a marketplace. Like I said, I'm a registered practitioner, and so if you were to go to the marketplace and do a search, you will find me. Of course, I'm probably going to drop out because I'm not part of an RPO, and so that's going to expire. They would also conduct quality audits of the assessments, and they would certify, submit, send certifications to what are called the OSCs, organizations seeking certification. Like I said, get used to all these acronyms because they're really big on it. The DoD, however, they would manage the standard, as well as the assessment guides. The accreditation board does not do that. So I mentioned training. So a lot of this is really complex, and if you go to their website, you can see it. But I'm trying to like condense it down to not overwhelm people. But it's really, in some ways, I kind of look at it like this is like really crazy. But anyway, so what they've done is they will have LPPs, licensed partner publishers, who will create the training that people have to go through, and then they will have LTPs, licensed training providers, who will provide the training. That is like, that one will create the training, okay, we wrote this, syllabus that you will present, and the providers will be the companies that will provide the training, and their hopes is this will get out to like, oh, I can go and get the training at my local community college, because they'll have, there'll be an LTP there, versus, there'll only be a handful of these companies. Further, the people doing the training have to be certified instructors. So it's just not like, oh yeah, I'm a trainer, I can do this sort of stuff. It's like, no. You need, I would need to go through training myself before I can present the training as a person. And then we have RPs and RPs. Like I said, I'm an RP. These are registered practitioners, are individuals who work for what are called registered provider organizations, RPOs. The company I used to work for is an RPO. As an RP, and I did this last year, is I had to go through training. I had to be approved. I actually had to go through a background check to be an RPO and other stuff, and then I had to complete the training. What RPs do is they provide what are called non-certified advisory service to help an organization prepare for certification. So think of it this way: it's really kind of simple. You got this company that they're a federal contractor, who knows what kind of security program they have, and now they're faced with, oh, you need to go get yourself CMMC certified at some level, and they're like, what does that mean? I don't know. And they look at this, I'm confused, I need help. So it's like, okay, rather than having just random IT expert coming and helping them, they can go to a registered practitioner, someone who has gone through the training, gone through the knowledge. They can come in and advise them and say like, okay, oh, let me look at your list system. Okay, based upon what we know, these are your gaps. This is what we need to fix, and so forth. What is kind of interesting or kind of weird is that while a company can both be an RPO and a C3PO, i.e., you can have a company can do both. Okay, we can help prepare you to get certified, and our company can certify you. You can't do both for the same company. That is not allowed. That's in fact a violation of the rules, because the reason for it is quite simple. If my company went and helped, access, contracting company to get ready for certification, if we then came and certified them, we're basically certifying our own work. So that's like a no-no. You can do one or the other, you can't do both with the same company. So I think we'll see the case where there'll be some companies will do both. Someone's like, well, we'll just help, but we won't certify. And someone might say, we'll just certify, we won't help, because they might view it as like, well, we're missing out, because if we spend all the time helping them and then we can't also certify them, then we're missing out. Now, companies are not required to go to make use of these RPs and RPOs, but they're there as a resource. And in my experience, and just in helping companies with preparing for SOC 2 and high trust and other things, having a qualified company coming in and helping you, get there is very, very important. Not every company has a really good security program. They might not have people inside that really understand things, but if you're having someone come in and help them out, that makes it, to me, it makes it much more successful. Then we have certified assessors, which I will be honest, do not exist yet. They only have provisional. And here's an area where it gets really complex. If you're curious about what it entails to become an assessor, go to the AB's website. It's kind of interesting. So basically, they have different levels. They have the certified professional, and they have assessor at level 1, 3, and 5. And here's how it works. Everyone has to get the certified professional level. Okay. If you want to assess a company at level 1, you then need to get the professional level, and then you need to do level 1, assessor level certification. If you want to certify a company at level 3, great. You need to get the professional, then you need to get level 1, and then you need to level 3. And then if you're level 3, you can do a level 1, 2, or 3 certification. And the same thing with 5. However, if you have to go look at the website, is not only is there different levels of training, there's also experience requirements and so forth that needs to be met. So, before you can become a level 1 assessor, you have to actually participate in so many assessments. And the same thing for level 3. Before you get level 3, you need to do so many, level 3 assessment just as a participant, so to speak, before you get certified there. There's also requirements about citizenship. You have to be a U.S. citizen. There's background requirements, and at the higher levels, security clearances. So there's a lot to it, and at this point, they just have the provisional assessors. They haven't even released the training yet for these different levels. In addition, they're certified instructors, master instructor, which is the trainers. Okay, and for them to be an instructor, you have to go through professional level 1 and 3 and 5. Okay, and then there's the quality auditors. These will be people who will be employees of the board, because they will do quality audits of the certification after, once the work has been done, they will then check that out. So it's really complex. I also understand they will all certification will last for a year, but it's not clear to me, how do you get recertified? Do we have to do continuing education? Do we have to do experience? That's unclear. You know, like for my certifications, it's very clear what I need to do to maintain it. And for these, I don't know yet. So it's pretty complex. I mentioned the C3PAOs, and these are organizations that the assessors will work for you. You cannot be independent. You must work for a C3PO, and they must also meet some big criteria. They have to be U.S. owned. They can't be foreign owned. Hopefully that's obvious, but you know, just in case. They have to meet certain financial checks on them. They themselves, as an organization, must get ISO 17020 certified. They, as an organization, must also be level 3 certified. You know, so there's a lot to it. So there are no, as far as I know, at this point there are no C3PAOs at this point. There are POs, but there's no C3PAs at this point. So hopefully I'm not confused everyone at this point on all this sort of, you know, kind of background, but let's kind of delve into the CMMC itself. So what they've done is they've created this as 5 levels. They call it the processes, which is performed, documented, managed, reviewed, optimizing. There's the practices. So number 1 is basically what they call basic cybersecurity. You know, 2 is intermediate, 3 is good, and 4 is proactive, and 5 is advanced. The focus, as I said, is that for 1, that's for just, hey, we want you to safeguard the contract information. 2 was really only created as a halfway point to 3. Because the way it works for all of these is that depending on the contracts, it will require one of these levels. So if your company is just making boots, let's be honest, it's probably gonna be level 1, you know, basic stuff. Whereas if you're doing something more serious, like you're building, you know, important like radio components or, you know, some of that, that's probably gonna be like a level 3 at least. And what I had heard in some of the meetings and what, you know, that I've been to with CMMC people is, you know, a lot of contracts would be level 1, a lot of contracts would be level 3. So the kind of implied, you will not see any contract requiring level 2. Level 4 and 5 would be very rare. These would be one for like, you know, kind of like very kind of sensitive stuff, like, okay, we want you to, you know, like the company's going to write the guidance software for missiles or something like that. That would be a 4 or 5. You know, you can see here, like 1 is contract information, 3 is protecting CUI, and then 4 and 5 is more advanced, where it's also, hey, reducing APTs. 2 was created as basically just a halfway to 3 to make it more palatable, as opposed to, okay, if your company has to be 3, you know, let's not scare you, like, you know, to jump straight to 3. It's like, okay, do 1, get it, okay, move to 2, get 2 done, then move to 3, kind of make it a little bit more palatable.
Sorry, Michael, I'm sorry, because this is pretty good.
Yeah.
So let's say I had like licensed drivers of DoD people. Where should I be? At 5 or at 3?
Probably a 1. You know, like it's all about the security needed for what you're doing. You know, if you're doing like,
right, what if I was like an Oracle or Microsoft?
The funny thing is if you're just providing commercial off-the-shelf software, you don't have to worry about CMMC.
Really?
Yeah. So if all I'm doing is like, okay, we're gonna go and buy Microsoft Word, that's just commercial off-the-shelf software. With Oracle, if it's more like you're providing, you're using the Oracle's cloud services, that's more FedRAMP than CMC.
I see.
So
Great.
I mean, what's kind of frustrating is they haven't really done a really. I mean, I've gone to some of the town halls and whatnot, and they kind of talked about kind of the samples. But it was kind of frustrating at this point. They're kind of like just kind of vague examples because they haven't. They're just barely implementing this at this point. Because they haven't ramped up where you've got it. The whole assessors in place and this sort of stuff. You can't at this point say like, okay, you need to be 1 or 3 or whatever level. They're slowly ramping up, and it's not to the point where it's easy to understand what these different levels are. Which is always again kind of frustrating. This is a slide taken actually from the book. Kind of showing the different layers. So they have these domains. Domains would be things such as training, media control, and so forth. And then they have processes, capabilities, and practices that are leveled across these things. They kind of define what you need to be doing. So here is a kind of expansion of the processes. So, and this is kind of interesting, is that when you're at level 1, there actually isn't any maturity processes. It's like, it's even almost shocking when I look at it like you don't even have to have written policies if you're at level 1. Policies don't come in until level 2. So the idea is that you can be kind of very ad hoc because it's what you're kind of doing isn't super critical. We need to have some basics, and so they don't want to create an undue burden on these. I mean, like I said, this is like we said, the company that's making boots. So some basic stuff, and you're good. Versus you're doing a much more you're doing like radio components and this sort of stuff, which means you need to be have much more in place. So like at level 2, you have to have a policy. You have to have how are you going to implement that policy, and then more of that for level 3. Have it, but also resource a plan. So there's more things. And then at 4, you're doing things that you're measuring your effectiveness. How good are you at patching your systems? Things like that. So it gets more complex. But again, I said 4 and 5 are more. They told me is more rare. 1 and 3 are more likely. But again, it's depending upon the type of contracts. So there's a lot of companies that will just the type of the work they do. They're only going to need level 1 because that's the type of working they're due. Whereas others will be at level 3 and probably never need to go any higher just because of the type of work that they do. This is the one that kind of again taken from the book showing kind of the levels. But this is the next thing because it shows where they pull these things from. So level 1, they basically pull from this document called the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR regulations. So that's where these practices are. Whereas it's at level 2 and 3, they pulled in the stuff from, 171, and it's almost like they took some of them at level 2 and the rest in level 3, and then in 4 and 5 they started adding in more important practices to make it more secure. This one is interesting because it kind of shows these sort of practices, how they kind of layered them over the different levels. Like here we have the access control where it goes from level 1 to level 5 all the way across, but there's some where they don't even exist at level 1. And I was actually kind of surprised by this. Awareness and training isn't needed at level 1. Well, I was kind of shocked by that because I kind of view security awareness training as being kind of universal. But if you're a level 1 organization, it's not required. So it's kind of surprising. Some of the things that aren't needed at level 1. They wanted very kind of the very basic things to go with, and then it's like, okay, at level 2 things really start kicking in at level 3. And as I said, there'll be a lot of companies, their contracts will be at level 1. and a lot will be at level 3. And of course, again, these add on. So if you're at level 3, you need to do everything at 1, 2, and 3. So, but this to me was kind of surprising. And actually, I said I've got. We're going to actually take a look at what is in these documents. So I think you'll get a good idea of this. So I want to take a look at what we mean by level 1, the basic hygiene. So think of this like processes. They're or they perform specified practices. Because the organization may only be able to perform these practices in an ad hoc manner, and may or may not rely on documentation, there's no process maturity. So they kind of view that for basic hygiene, they can just do the best they can, and they'll be okay. As that documentation isn't required at level 1, which again is kind of surprising. This is actually all the ones that were at level 1. Access control, which in identification and authentication, which are kind of the basic things. You know who your users are. You kind of have some controls under what they can access. Media protection. You destroy media when you're done with it. Okay, that's pretty basic. Physical protection. You limit physical access. You escort visitors, have visitor logs. So that's pretty basic. System communication due to monitoring and control. System and information integrity. This is things like your patching systems. You have malware. You have antivirus, and you do basic vulnerability scan. That's pretty simple. Hopefully, most companies could do that. So at this point, let me pull up the 3 documents. So this, you guys can see it. This is the main document, which actually isn't that long. I think it's like 23 pages. Let me double check. Yeah, 23 pages for the basic, but it doesn't get into a lot of depth. This is system and information integrity, SI. So level 1 needs these things and so forth. So if you look at level, identify, report, and correct information system flaws. Basically, we're talking about patching. You know what you need to patch, and you apply the patches. Okay. Provide protection from malicious code. Okay. Anti-malware. Update malicious code. Okay. You have anti-malware. You make sure it's managed, so it's being updated with new defs. Okay. And then I said perform periodic scans. Okay, that's a vulnerability scan. Real-time scan of files from external sources as files are downloaded. Most anti-malware that I've seen for the last several years will do that for you. You do and download something, the anti-malware goes like, okay, let me take a look at that first. Yeah. So that's what, of course, and this is the basic document, that's all there is. Of course, we as IT people are going to like, I want some more, let's see some more depth. So the appendices have the more in-depth stuff. So each of these ones here, they spend like, depending on them, anywhere from like a page or 2 or 3 going into more in-depth. But this is where we get into the appendices, where we get, at least for people like ourselves, to understand it. So this is that identify, report, and correct system flaws. So they have a discussion taken from 171. They have some clarification, to kind of explain it, I guess, in kind of layman's terms, and they usually give some examples, and use them pretty basic, like, you have many responsibilities at your company, including IT. You know that malware, ransomware browsing can be big problems. You make sure to enable all security updates for your software, including the operating system. Okay. And that's it. And of course, they give you some references, and so forth for the other ones in dealing with malware. And that's what's in here. The other one I brought up here is, this is actually the assessment guide from the DoD. So if I'm the guy coming in to your company to assess you to see if you're meeting these, this is what I need to be using to kind of check you out. So, and again, this is the same one, the identify, report, and correct the system flaws in a timely manner. So what should I be looking for? Okay, did you set down, when you're going to identify these and the time frame? When you're going to report on it? When you're going to correct it? And if some of you have experience with patching at systems, this is pretty standard in terms of you say, okay, if it's a critical patch that we get reported, we will patch it within a week. If it's, a medium, severity, we'll give it a month, and if it's a low, 2 or 3 months, and you would have that written down in some place, you're most likely your procedures. So that's what this is talking about is that, hey, have you set down when you're going to be checking these things out? And then I kind of had to validate that, you've got this down, that you're doing it. So that's how that would work. And they even have here in terms of like, examples and so forth, like, getting data, how you would test it, who would you ask? You talk to, the system and network administrators and so forth, so they don't handhold you, but at least they set down some guidance to make sure, hey, is things being done properly? So that's what the assessment guide does. And there's an assessment guide at this point for level 1 and level 3. I don't think they've done it for 4 and 5 yet. So that's what we have at this point. And again, these are all PDFs that you can get from the DoD's website for this. I was trying to find a decent slide on this, but this one is, I guess, is okay in terms of like how it works. So in terms of getting certified in the CMC. So the idea would be, the gap assessment, this would probably be either the company would look at themselves and say like, where's our gaps? What do we need to fix? Or if they were bringing a third party, that registered professional to come in and take a look, say, okay, we looked at it, this is your gaps, you need to address these. You fix those gaps, you add new tools, new systems and whatnot. At that point, you have the audit and certification. This is where you bring in, the certified assessor. They do the formal assessment. Once they've done their assessment, put together that report, that gets sent to the accreditation board for their quality audit to make sure it was done properly. And they haven't yet done it, but I'm just basing this on my experience with, with how HITRUST does it. Is the audit and whatnot, where the work being done by the assessor is usually can be like a couple of months of evidence gathering, examination, and so forth. And then you turn it over quality audit. That's going to be another month or so period as people take a look at it. And then hopefully, if you did get well, hope you get your certification. But it shouldn't be like, okay, we're done, we're certified. You want to make sure, hey, let's work on improving it and doing better, so that when they come along the next time, that it'll be smooth sailing. That's true of all these sort of assessments. You don't just like, okay, boom, we're done. And one thing I'm even kind of puzzled in is that, at least it's not clear to me with CMMC, but when I look at others, is it's not so much a pass-fail. That's where in some cases that you get a pass-fail, but it's not like you have to be 100% and you get certification. It could be like if it was like a 0 to 100. It's more like if you scored and you were at like 75% or higher, you get certified. But that's the thing, you weren't at 100, you were at 75. So you want to make sure, hey, let's make it a little stronger next time, so that you can better pass it. You don't necessarily have to be at 100%, but better yet, 80% versus that 75% cutoff or whatever it may be. And that's not clear to me with seeing the CMC yet. So where are things going? as I kind of alluded to at the beginning, there's been a lot of issues raised about the accreditation board and so forth. I was sort of like familiar with that because, again, my company was looking at becoming, an RPO, and we were talking about becoming a C3 PAO. I don't know if they ever went that route. So I was looking at it. I was going to become, an RP, and if we went that route, I was looking at like what would it take for me to become one of these certified assessors. Looking at, okay, when do they have the training? When do they have the training? We try to become. I think some of us had applied to be provisional assessors and didn't get picked. So we were kind of looking at that, and I was looking at their timeline and whatnot. This is last year, thinking like, okay, from what they're telling us, I think they'll start rolling out the training at the end of 2020, and didn't happen. In fact, I was a little annoyed by how long it took for us to get the training to be an RP. And here we are in, here we are October 2021, and the training for being an assessor still isn't out there. The lower level, the professional one, I think is about to be coming out, but the assessors that follow that isn't there. So that's the thing. I don't think they've approved any C3 PAOs. Training for has not been released. We only have provisional assessors. So it's not quite clear where that is. Again, a lot of things that were brought up was the fact that the AB is an independent body, unlike with how they did with FedRAMP. And so there was a lot of questions being brought up. Maybe it's a good question, a lot of concern about like, pay for play and, who this person in bed with that person, and, a lot of things like that that were in the press that I was seeing. So it's really, I think there was actually some shakeouts. There was people that left the board and new people that came on board, and it was like, okay, why did that person leave? Were they pushed out, asked to leave? It was it was pretty crazy. The DoD is doing a review of the defarge rule that relates to CMC. So I think this is going to be a really good thing, but it's really complex, and I'm not sure when we're going to see the training there and assessors actually there and contracts requiring it and so forth. And I also wonder, as I said at the beginning, is at this point this is just for DoD contractors. What happens? And of course, to degree when it becomes that it's not just DoD contracts, but any federal contracts would require it. And one thing I also started wondering, because again, FISMA, and if you will, 853 is intended for federal systems, but I am aware of various state level systems that make use of 853. So I started thinking like, okay, we got the CMMC, it's only for DoD. At some point, it's going to be for federal systems. Could we see it be asked for contractors at the state level at some point? I don't know. I would find it hard to believe that every state level contractor would have to have it, but I could see certain types of state contracts being asked for it. But stranger things could happen. But so hopefully that helps. If you're curious, you can go to the AB's website, cmcab.org, and get overwhelmed by all the stuff on all the different assessors and what all it takes and so forth. As I said, the DoD controls the model and the assessment guides, and you can go to that website and you can download and read all the material. Like that, I have my hard copy that this is our PDFs, and if you want to read through it and just have your eyes glaze over, have fun. I'm kind of used to it because I read a lot of this sort of stuff, but even then for me, it's like, oh God, this is so boring, but it is what it is. So any questions at this point? See, nope, that's not what I want to do. How do I stop sharing?
I have a question. It's regarding NIST SP 800-171. How, if you're under this, how do you enforce this? Do you have to hire a person like you? Do you need to hire? You mentioned something, you can't do your own assessment. So,
well, there's different ways that companies could do it. I mean, even with some of the companies that I was working with, one of the problems that I've seen, again, with a lot of clients I was dealing with as a security assessor is that, a lot of companies were, they only had like maybe 2 or 3, IT people, and they didn't have, and sometimes the bandwidth or the money to hire, like, say, a full-time compliance person that would manage this. So the funny thing was some of the work that I was doing for some of the clients was, I was hired as a consultant, for them as a virtual CISO or this sort of stuff. And so to a degree, I was like their virtual compliance officer. I wasn't full time, but I was, making sure that evidence was, that they were implementing things. I went in for some clients, maybe, develop the policies and put them in place and making sure that, they were implementing and this sort of stuff. So, more so for smaller companies, I can certainly see them. I mean, you see that already, where you have companies who outsource their entire IT. They have no IT people. They have some third-party IT company. You have the concept of, we talk about software as a service, but there's people, we talk about security as a service. So you have a small company, you've outsourced your IT because you just don't have enough, you can't afford to hire full-time IT people. You could hire, a company to be your security staff, your SOC, that can do this. There is the concept, and it is kind of accepted that you have the concept of a fractional virtual CISO. So I could certainly see for small companies that you would have a fractional, virtual, compliance officer, compliance group that would come in, fix things up for them, making sure they have the processes in place, and then be the one going to kind of check on them to make sure things are being done properly, versus hiring a full-time person that you really couldn't justify doing. That's how I would see it.
right.
And to agree, this whole idea of the registered professional, the purpose for such a person is you got someone who is knowledgeable in the CMMC who's going to come in and help your organization. I could see it even where that person, because they and their company can't be the one certifying you, is they would be involved, maybe involved with that company and help them get certified, maybe working with the certifying company. And then when they got certified, you could keep that person around to say, hey, stay around and help make sure we stay good. Because in a degree, that's kind of what I did with some clients where, okay, I helped them get, their SOC 2, great, but they're gonna come around the next year to do it. So, let's make sure that things are going smoothly for the next go around.
That's great. Let me ask you one more thing. Let's say I participate in a bid, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say I participate in a bid for a component or a new weapon or a new weapon system or something cyber, right? A branch of the DoD wants to develop. which one of this would apply to that company? Because usually, remember, some of these contracts are actually given to, for example, minorities, minority-owned companies, or small businesses, because it's a directive, right, of DoD. How would these people do?
Well, the way it's going to work is that, is my understanding, I've never even seen some of these government contracts, is going to say, like, if you want to bid on this contract, you must be certified at CMM level, what have you, and it's going to be appropriate for that contract. And again, my understanding from what they've talked about is that, in many cases, it's going to depend on the type of contracts you're going to go after. If you're a company that you do, like clothing, and boots and clothing and this sort of stuff, all the contracts you would probably go after are probably going to be level 1. Whereas if you're a contractor that you're going after, missile guidance systems, I'm going to have to suspect that that's going to require, a 4 or 5. And so it's going to be, it's all the time. So basically, depending on the type of the type of business or type of contractor you are, all the contractors are probably going to be the same level. And one thing they've also talked about, and I probably should have mentioned that, but it wasn't really clear how it is apparently, at least at the beginning, they're going to take into consideration that companies, contractors who are going and bidding are going to need to be at some level. There's going to be a cost involved with that. So apparently there's going to be some kind of a program in place, at least at the beginning, where you're going to get funding to help you achieve the level you need. And that'll probably be something that'll exist for a while until it's like, okay, well, yeah, at this point, everyone who needs to get it has it, and it, it's viewed as a cost of doing business, type thing.
I see. Okay, so it looks like this stuff is pretty good and it's well intentioned, but I'm not sure how this, like, for big companies, it's just for sure this should be applied. But I have myself participated in some of these bids that I just told you about. And what you end up doing is basically playing with the big guys. Maybe that's how you're able to get.
And then I would also look at it again. If you look at the different the 5 levels, it's like, unless you're one of the ones where, to me, the big guys would be the ones that will be that would need like the 3, 4, and 5 levels.
Right.
And if you are a small company, yeah, that could be difficult in terms of, like, to make sure that you get to that level as well. But you kind of wonder, again, I'm not really as up on some of the federal contracting as others, but oftentimes they'll have special deals where, like, oh yeah, we want to help out the small companies that will have like a grant or what have you. So I could certainly see where they'll have, like, some special deals where, okay, you're a small company going out for federal bids, that's going to cost you to get this level of whatever CMMC level, so they might make funding available. And one thing is also, which I'm not clear at this point, is not really clear what the cost of getting certified is. It's still being hashed out, but I think that they want to make sure that it doesn't get out of control. They don't want these companies that are like, wanting to charge, $100,000, for you to get, certified at level 3, where you got other companies who are like, well, we can do that for 50,000 or 10,000.
Right.
So unfortunately, I'm not really knowledgeable on the money cost. So it's like, for even for like myself, there's like, well, what does it cost to, like, get a SOC 2 report? that I'm oblivious to because I was never really involved in that, or high trust. I know there is costs involved, but what those costs is, I don't know. And then I sort of like wonder, okay, well, if I were to go to, a big firm versus a small firm, is that a cost, would that be a cost savings for me?
Right.
I don't know.
Right. And that leads me to, sorry, another question. I'm sort of I'm going off here. That leads me to the other question. When you talk about CUI, right? It seems to me that CUI can be anything, right? If I develop certain things that a certain branch of the military uses, I think that may turn into CUI that may not be disclosed publicly. Even stuff that may not be per se military or used for military purposes, but that could provide eventually an adversary with hints of the usage of this at the military branches.
Yeah, and that's why, I mean, it's even interesting that they have, I should have mentioned, is there actually training you need to go through to understand CUI and how to protect it. That's something that was being rolled out by the accreditation board. It's actually coming from the DoD. If you go to the page, the accreditation board page is actually a link where you can go and get training on how to protect CUI and so forth. But yeah, it is problematic in terms of like making sure that you understand it. Because I think also for a lot of us, I know for myself, I mean, I didn't even know what the heck that was, because my thinking has always been like, oh, if it needs to be protected, it's secret, it's classified secret and whatever is above secret. But to find out that, oh no, there's this data that's below secret that you still have to protect, and it's really serious. And it was sort of like, really? I mean, I didn't think about that, even though I was.
But think about this. And actually, all of us, most of us here that are in the industry, we are certainly exposed to this. Let's say you create a model that detects something that an adversary has, right? That is either not commercial, neither the government is aware of it, neither the adversary knows that you're about to discover it. As soon as you publish it, you told them, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I was familiar from Motorola from all the our different security levels for our documents and so forth. But it's sort of like I didn't really connect the dots that that's the true. That was also true in the government space, that there was this data that was below secret but still had to be protected. It was so sensitive, and we didn't want our adversaries to get it and this sort of stuff. And I was like, okay, I just didn't connect those dots, but it's kind of an eye opener,
right?
But I mean,
excellent.
The importance of what we do that a lot of time we kind of lose sight of, and I think even people outside of our field, certainly, I've occasionally have mentioned to people outside of our field about what are ATPs, and I don't mean ATPs in just sort of threats. I mean sort of like there's these groups out there and they're trying to get our data and so on and so forth. And I think that the average Joe person is just totally oblivious to that sort of thing, unless something comes like the Colonial Pipeline and they're really like, there's bad guys out there and they're like hit this hospital and someone died. What?
Right.
Oh.
Well, this was an amazing presentation, Michael. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Any questions out there, guys?
Yeah.
No questions. Are you gonna share the slides?
I could. I'm not sure where the best place to share it.
You can put it in under Discord in the presentation files. So you can send it to me, and I will upload them and put it in GitHub.
Yeah, I mean, I put them together. I mean, the slides were actually, the pictures actually pulled from various places, and some of the slides were actually from the the document. And if, what's good is I would say, recommend people, I mean, there's actually a presentation they did as part of the DoD stuff. Basically, it was, a presentation on the CMMC model. I printed it out as part of my little booklet here, but just even the basic document, has the different, diagrams and so forth. A lot of them that I used, and so forth. And there's like, and if you look in the appendix, there's like a glossary, and they explain some of the things and so forth. And it is kind of like, and what's also nice is if you go to the AB website, they were doing a lot of these presentations, these town halls and so forth. I was making a point of going and attending some of them, and I was able to understand certain things, and one which I then turned around and told my company. I mean, one of the first things I picked up was hearing them, talking about CUI, and I'm like, what? It was just sort of like they kind of threw me off, and they're like, oh, okay, And I mean, that's the way it is with, I guess, the DoD. They more often pronounce the acronym, so it's DIFARS and CUI and DIB and all that sort of stuff, and you just have to kind of get used to that sort of thing, and pretty quickly.
Well, thank you very much. This was amazing for all of you out there. We do have a presentation on the 23rd. On the 23rd, we have, let's see what we got. We got intro hardware hacking. I think Honey is going to do that one. And then on the 30th, we have the South Florida Hack the Flag, which is an amazing event. The next week, we have Pacific Hackers with Faraday, which is a penetration testing product, which they have told me that they're going to be giving demos if you're interested. So you may get a trial account. And there is a talk about bioinformatics as well. So I thank you very much for attending today. Thank you, Michael. This was amazing. Thank you. And hopefully you'll be able to share those slides. This is something that for a lot of you who are already in InfoSec, is something we need to understand, and it's getting more and more and more prevalent in what we do, even though we may not deal with policy. So thank you very much, Michael.
I would even say this way is, even if you're not, like I said, if I'm kind of the security and compliance person, at certain companies, we're like, okay, yeah, you might be, the guy down at the SOC, but I'm probably going to be the guy coming to you and asking you questions and asking for evidence, and making sure that you're doing things properly, and that you're keeping notes, and you're putting things into a ticketing system or a Jira or what have you, because I'm going to need that data to give to the assessors coming in to show that yes, we're doing what we should be doing. So you might not be doing, you might not be the compliance person, but depending on what your role is, you're the guy or gal the compliance person is going to go to and say, like, hey, you need to be doing this, or you need to be creating this evidence because I need it, and and so forth. So you're going to be proliferally involved with this sort of thing.
Well, thank you very much, guys. I'll see you soon. Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Yeah.